I want to take just a little break from the topics of English and talk about another subject that is incredibly dear to my heart and I think is really, really vital for us as educators and as you go into summer reading camps and as we talk about struggling readers. And that's learning styles and learning differences. And the reason this is really important is a lot of educators have very similar learning styles to one another. And we were the students who really liked the classroom. We have a particular blend of intuitive, visual, and auditory learning styles that fit well with the way that modern education has defined the classroom. If you weren't in those categories and you hated school, you probably didn't return back to spend your life in school. And I want us to look at some of those students and some of those kids and what they experience and as adults and as children. So the first thing, we've talked a little bit about this, and this is my own categories from my own observations as an educator. There are logical, literal students. These are math and science kids. You give them a rule and they want to apply it. They love rules. They love figuring out what are the laws of physics. They love taking complex problems and distilling them down and trying to understand what makes things tick. And then there are intuitive students. And so I sometimes think that we don't understand that these are both strengths. Intuitive is also a strength. It's a good thing when you can roll with things and you don't get hung up on little details. And you know what? My daughter, who's a very strong intuitive student, I sometimes would joke with her because she could just roll with those sight words and those exceptions in English, became a strong student. But with math, she would argue with me if the problem was, well, it was close enough. Got the idea. So these are strengths, they're weaknesses, and we need all kinds of people in our society, and we need them all and functioning well within their gifts. I also think, and this is also kind of my breakout, from my observation, there's really creative minds and there's very concrete minds. And sometimes those creative minds are the daydreamers in your class, and they're making up stories and they're like off in another world, and we want to pull them back. Here's a tip. Utilize that gift. Here's one student's illustration of one of the spelling rules. And the rule is we often double F, L, and S after a single vowel at the end of a base word. Occasionally other letters are doubled. And so when you give creative students an opportunity to illustrate this, it looks something like this. Well, this is the class, and the S's are best friends, so they're holding hands. And do you notice they're wearing lipstick too? And they're approaching the teacher, and I can't remember why the teacher is backwards, but there's a very elaborate story behind this. When you give creative students rules and let them tell stories, guess what? The whole class might remember the rule better because they're going to remember the S's holding hands and wearing lipstick. But if you ask a concrete science mind to do this, they are going to be so tense. So we don't need all kids to do this, but we need to free kids to explore and express what they're learning about language in ways that make sense to who they are as people. Now, let's also go over the traditional learning styles. By the way, where are we on our training manual, just so I orient you? We're on page 29. Okay, so the traditional learning styles they're visual learners. Visual learners learn through seeing. And the visual component of reading, we often think about this as the shapes of the phonograms. They're the shapes of the print on the page. And we often think of reading as primarily a visual activity. And it has a visual component. Now, to understand strong visual learners better, I recommend all teachers watch this movie called Thinking in Pictures, My Life with Autism by Temple Grandin. Have any of you seen it? A number of you. If you have not seen it, this is a great movie to watch with your families. What is the actor's name? Claire Danes. She does an amazing job. It's a really enjoyable film. But in this film, you begin to experience what it is like to be a visual learner. And Temple Grandin was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2010 by Time magazine. She does animal science at the University of Colorado, but she's also really known for understanding her gift as a visual thinker. And it's fascinating. And in that film, there's a portion of it where one of her teachers discovers the power of her as a visual thinker and begins to harness that in her education. And I really believe that it was that teacher's grasping and understanding of it, not as a disability, but as a gift, that really was huge in Temple Grandin's life and becoming, going on to pursue what she did. So as an educator, watch that to understand deeper what it's like to be a visual thinker. There are also, what? Auditory learners. How do auditory learners learn? Through listening. Now, you may not think about this intuitively, but reading has an auditory component. Did you know that? The auditory component of reading is listening. In fact, strong readers read primarily with the auditory center of their brain. They're actually not primarily reading with the visual centers. They're reading almost exclusively with the auditory processing centers. They are listening to print as if they are listening to a conversation. And so that's where phonemic awareness is important. They're listening to sounds, they're listening to words. And by the way, the research shows if you're a strong reader, you're using the auditory processing centers of your brain. And that research has also shown that strong readers, even if they weren't taught with phonetics, have learned the code in some way. You became little linguists and you figured out enough of it that it made sense to you and you are hearing all those sounds. So we need to draw those connections explicitly from the visual to the auditory. Another form of learning style is kinesthetic. Does anyone know who this is, by the way? This is Jonathan Horton. He is the captain of the men's U.S. gymnastics team. He was in the last Olympics, if you saw him. And there's a fabulous quote from him about why he began gymnastics, and I want to read this to you. He said he began gymnastics at the age of 4 in 1990, and he said, "I was a wild child. I once climbed a pole in the middle of Target all the way to the ceiling. I used to do backflips on my parents' bed, and I rode the garage door to the top when I was only 3 years old." You want these kids in your classroom, right? So the kinesthetic component of reading is writing. And you may not think about it, but when we write, we are experiencing words kinesthetically. And we are going to spend about an hour on this in just a few minutes. But before we do, I want to explore the kinesthetic learner because this changed my life. And I believe as educators it can change our lives. And I believe as a nation, this is a message we must hear. So this is Gillian Lynne. And I don't know, are any of you familiar with the name Gillian Lynne? So on the TED Talk, Why Schools Kill Creativity by Sir Ken Robinson, he tells this story. Another assignment for you. Watch the TED Talk, Why Schools Kill Creativity. Do all of you know about TED? Most of you do. And this is the most watched video on TED, 25 million views. It is profound. And he has something very profound to say to Western education, not just US schools. But one of the stories he told changed my life, and that was the story about Gillian Lynne. He said, I have a friend named Gillian, and when Gillian was young, her mother brought her to the physician and said, there's something wrong with Gillian. She cannot sit still in school. She's not doing well. And you can just imagine what she said. And the physician, it was the 1940s, I think, said, ma'am, let's step outside and talk about this privately. And while he did, he switched on the radio. And he said, let's observe Gillian for a few minutes. And Gillian began to dance. And he said, "Ma'am, there's nothing wrong with your daughter. She's a dancer. Bring her to a dance school." And she did. And as actually Ken Robinson said, he said, you know, someone today would have diagnosed her with ADD, but that, as Sir Ken Robinson says, that was not a condition available at that time. So they brought her to a dance school, and by the way, ADD is real. I know kids with the real disability of ADD, but there are kinesthetic kids who are getting misdiagnosed. They brought her to the dance school, and this was the line that changed my life. Gillian said when she got to the dance school, she met people like herself, people who thought through movement. I want you to stop and think about that, because almost no educators think through movement. And I had to think for a really long time about this because I do not think through movement. In fact, you know how I think? I think through speaking. And I used to think that was really strange, and my husband thinks it's incredibly weird because I'm like, here, I have to think about this. Will you just listen to me? And I might change my mind as I'm talking to you about it. But I do, I think through speaking. Maybe that's why I'm a public speaker. I love to speak. In college, I'd go and lecture myself to learn my notes. Is that okay? Yeah, that's what I want us to learn. That's okay. Is it okay to think through movement? Yeah, in fact, it's beautiful. Gillian went on to become the head of the Royal Ballet. She went on to work with Andrew Lloyd Webber and choreographed Cats and Phantom of the Opera. Gillian today is a multimillionaire. And as Ken Robinson says, if we had said, Gillian, calm down, sit still, her gift would have been lost to the world. So as educators in the United States today, we need to think again about kinesthetic learners. And now I'm going to bring this personal, because this happened for me at a time when I had a 6-year-old daughter who couldn't sit in a chair and would fall out of it because she was so active. And I'm going to share this as a parent, but also to challenge you to think about these kids in new ways and to think about the parents that you're interacting with. And so when I heard that, it made me begin to reframe my daughter, Hannah, and how I understood her. And it was just so happened that I saw that video over Christmas. And then in January, she was invited to participate on an elite gymnastics team. And I can tell you that as a parent, I would have said no, because she began to practice 20 hours a week. And it went up to almost 30 at one point. And I would have said, that is the overscheduled child, right? That's not good. It's going to distract her from academics. She's struggling with reading. She's struggling with this, on and on and on. But because of this, I said yes. Now, fast forward a little bit. It's Mother's Day. Oh, it's almost Mother's Day. And Hannah is not only a very kinesthetic child, she is incredibly competitive. She wants to win everything, which is also another challenge, right? And so she was like, Mom, find me a contest, find me a contest. And I don't know, I Googled and I found this contest where you get to write essays to mothers to give them advice for Mother's Day. This was perfect for her, because she also wants to be like in charge. And she wrote this essay. She went off by herself, of course. She's like 8 years old now. She's practicing 25 hours a week. She practices 3 hours in the morning, several in the evening. I mean, and I'm blown away. She's super, super strong. All this matters. And so she writes this essay. She hands it to me. And do you know what it said? I really almost myself fell out of my chair. It said, mothers, please make sure your child gets enough exercise, because when I don't get enough exercise, I can't focus. Now, this undid me, because to me, my half hour of a workout in the morning is more than enough. When Hannah is talking about exercise, she's talking like 3 to 5 hours a day. By the way, is this okay? We need to understand as a culture this is good. And this is my message to us as a culture about kinesthetic learners. We have an enormous problem with child obesity. And what do we constantly tell kids? Sit still. What are kinesthetic learners telling us? Get moving. They have a message. They have a gift for us as a culture. Now, this applies to our classrooms because in our classrooms, we usually want to sit still. And if we embrace the kinesthetic gift, we're going to play games like we did in the phonemic awareness section where you're up and moving. And I'm going to help you today to discover games where your kids can get up, get moving, and practice reading. And do you know what? If you embrace that gift in your classroom is going to happen, everybody is going to have more fun, including the non-kinesthetic learners. And if you fight that gift in your classroom, do you know what's going to happen? You are going to be driven crazy. You are, right? I mean, it's true. So I want to challenge us to embrace the kinesthetic gift, and I'm going to also open our ideas to how to apply this to reading, because reading does not need to be sedentary. I know that's kind of it's a mind-shifting thought. And in summer reading camp, I was actually really surprised when I saw that your legislation said 5 hours a day. Were any of you? I was like, 5 hours, third graders, wow. But you will not survive for 5 hours a day teaching reading if you do not get up and get moving. So you need to be playing reading games on the playground, in the gym. And a lot of the schools who are adopting some of our curriculum are going, oh my word, we can practice reading in the gym. And the kids, once again, they beg for this. They want to be active. They're having fun. And they're now practicing the very skills they need to accomplish becoming the strong readers that they can become. All right, very, very briefly, I am not going to spend much time today on dyslexia, but I want to be clear, dyslexia is real. And if you want more information on it, visit the International Dyslexia Association website. There's a lot of information there. And in summary, dyslexia means difficulty with words. And there are two types of dyslexia. Most people don't realize that. We only think about the visual type, where visual dyslexia is that letters are reversed for those readers and spellers. There's confusion about where words end. It's an issue with the visual processing part of reading. But there's a second form of dyslexia that's not as commonly known, and that's auditory. And that's where they struggle with auditory processing. If you struggle with auditory processing, you will also struggle with reading comprehension and reading, because you're not able to take in those auditory messages. And so we need to understand that when we're working with our students. Now, here's the other secret. Almost everything I'm bringing you today is actually the research of the International Dyslexia Association and what is used to taught dyslexic learners. Why do I not have all over the place, this is for students with dyslexia? Because 78% of students in South Carolina are struggling with reading, or 73, whatever that number was. This is good for everybody. And a much, much smaller portion of your students have a learning disability. But this works with everyone. And it's time we stop going, this is only for kids with disabilities. This is for everyone. I don't have a learning disability with language, and I have gained much deeper roots, and my own language skills are so much stronger. So that's the reason, but what you're learning is also what is taught to aid these students, and usually in private language learning centers by very expensive tutors. Should it be that way? All right, let's look at reading and physical development. We are now on page 31, is that correct? Okay, so we often think about problems that kids have with letter reversals, and that's the first place that we jump to. And what we need to understand as educators when we start thinking about these things is that reading is not just an intellectual activity. It is also an activity that involves muscle memory, and that's the muscle memory of the eyes. And that muscle memory in English is left to right and down the page. If we were reading Arabic, it would be the opposite direction. Some languages go up and down. But kids need to develop this muscle memory in order to become strong readers. And that takes practice. I like to think about it like a child playing the piano. You do not expect a child to just sit down and be able to play the piano without developing the muscle memory in their fingers. The same way with the eyes. So how do you develop muscle memory for reading? I'm going to make a suggestion that might make your teachers' hearts for summer reading camp very sad, and I'm sorry. Don't let them sit across from each other. Because what happens when you see students like this? They are seeing texts like this. And many of your kids who are struggling with reading are struggling with visual confusion. And you don't know which ones are which. And in your younger classrooms, you also shouldn't be letting them see print upside down, because this can just be creating visual input confusion. You need to stand or sit yourself in front of your students. Many adults who have visual dyslexia or confusion issues will tell me that if I even stand at a right angle to them, they struggle to interpret those images correctly, because you have to translate it 90 degrees. So let's just remove this barrier for these kids. And I had this experience with myself when I was helping to remediate my sons, and one of they're twins, right? So one of them, they learn all the phonograms, they learn all the rules, and in about 2 months, he was reading chapter books just fine. The other one was not. And it was because he was looking at all these things upside down. We were practicing at 90 degrees. And as soon as we removed those issues, all of a sudden it all began to straighten out for him. This is a huge issue. So my suggestion in summer reading camps is eliminate visual confusion of print upside down. Make sure they're sitting straight onto you in a traditional classroom. There's a reason it's set up like this. Also, do everything in the direction of reading and writing. When you're writing on the board, cross your T's in the direction of reading and writing. Many of us cross them backwards. Become conscious of it. Students' eyes are following those things inadvertently, and you're just reinforcing muscle memory. Erase in the direction of reading and writing. They're not intentionally following you with their eyes, but we're building muscle memory as they unintentionally do it. When you're reading a text aloud to the class, follow along with your finger. Show it to them. Don't tell them they have to follow you the whole time. That's really tedious. But they will for a little while, and they're building muscle memory. So it's really important to be reinforcing this. It's also very important to understand how traditional reading strategies undermine this. Because if you think about it, what we tell kids is, if you come to a word that you do not know, look at the first and the last letter. If you still don't know what it is, that's because you don't know all the phonograms and the rules to explain it within the word. If you still don't know what it is, go back and reread the sentence. If you still don't know what it is, go look at the pictures. What are their eyes doing? They are all over. So it's very important that we reinforce it. Now, another tip for you is this. If those pages have visual images on them, what is the strongest element on the page? It's going to be the picture, not the text. Take a blank piece of paper and cover up the picture. Say you can look at the picture all you want, but before you read, cover up the picture. If you need to, cover up all the lines so just the line you're reading is showing. There are kids, I promise you, who will go and get the paper to cover it up because it's such visual relief to them. Because they're not struggling with focus and attention, they're struggling to control their eyes. And that's also a really key distinction. We often say, focus, focus. They're not struggling with mentally focusing, they're struggling with the fact that their muscles and their eyes are not staying in the place they should because they're not strong enough. Okay, do you have any questions about this? Yes?
Would you say that that relates to the whole classroom environment? I mean, if the walls are filled with visual things, even if it's about learning, is that going to be confusing?
I don't think so. I don't know. I've never asked anyone who struggles with this. I mean, I think we should create a rich environment, but I think that what they're seeing right in front of them when they're looking down should be that way. I mean, that's an interesting thought. I don't think I could myself bear to say, let's have a blank plain classroom. That would just... But we can be conscious of it on a field of vision level for when they're trying to read and write. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you think the same concept exists when you put a lot of math problems on the same piece of paper? Are they
So the question is, does the same concept apply to math and many math problems on the page? Probably. And I think a very simple tip is to say, are you struggling to focus on one problem? Go ahead and cover up all the others. Very simple to do, right? Create a little way to cover those up and focus. Okay, so very practical tips on creating visual muscle memory. It's also important when we teach reading, whether it's phonograms, words, comprehension, to do this in a multisensory way, because all students learn faster and deeper with multisensory teaching. And on a brain level, it's really fascinating because we have areas of our brain that are visual, areas that are auditory, areas that are kinesthetic, areas that are about speech when we're speaking. And when we teach in a multisensory way in our classrooms, we get to use all those areas. Now, some students have much bigger, stronger visual centers, and they have weaker auditory centers. Some students have huge, strong kinesthetic centers. So when you're teaching multisensorily, you can target the strength of every student. But not only that, you get to build their areas of weakness, because now they're getting the auditory input that they're struggling with, or they're getting the visual input that they're struggling with. And the research shows when you do this, they build synapses across these regions of their brain. So they get to use their area of weakness use their area of strength while strengthening their area of weakness, build more synapses, and the conclusions are with multisensory learning, the learning is faster and it's deeper. So everything we need to teach with seeing, hearing, doing, and speaking, the 4 modes of language learning. Now, one of the things I have discovered, and I think is true across US schools, is that we are letting go of handwriting instruction in favor of emphasizing reading instruction. This is a huge mistake, because your kinesthetic kids in particular are not even able to experience texts on the level and on in the mode of learning that's the strongest for them. And no one else is getting to experience text kinesthetically either. And so there is a fascinating study that came out of the University of Norway a couple years ago, and I want to share with you the highlights of that study. What they did is they said, well, in the modern world and in the modern education systems, we are saying that handwriting's no longer important because everybody's going to use computers and keyboards. And it's keyboarding that's important. So they wanted to test this theory. And what they did is they took groups of adults and they taught them a new alphabet. And they taught one group of adults how to type that alphabet, and they taught a second group of adults how to write it. And then they tested them at various intervals. The group of adults that learned to write it had fewer reversals in writing and reading. And they had longer-term memory of those sounds. In addition, they said, well, let's take this a step farther. What is the brain doing when we teach handwriting? So they did a functional MRI. Functional MRI research is so fascinating to me because they can take a person in an MRI machine, track the oxygenation and blood flow to their brain while they perform a task. And what they found was that the adults who learned to write at the same time were triggering the kinesthetic areas of their brain while they were reading. They weren't doing anything kinesthetic, but they were triggering that area. Now, other research shows, when you look at other languages, that people in different languages trigger different parts of their brain when reading. And I believe it's Chinese, that many of those students read very strongly with kinesthetic areas of their brain. And I think that, if I understand it correctly, one of the reasons would be because they do a tremendous amount of writing and copy work as they're learning those characters. So their kinesthetic area of their brain is learning those characters at the same time as the visual and auditory parts of their brain. This is a good thing. So we need to bring handwriting instruction back as part of reading instruction because it's vital. So we are going to spend a little bit of time on this. And here's something I want you to think about with summer reading camps. When you are thinking about that writing strand, you need to also be thinking about this in terms of handwriting. And I would suggest the first week, you should be teaching handwriting, the second week as well, revisiting this. Because as you know, many of those struggling readers have handwriting like kindergartners or preschoolers. Those are signs that something is really going on. And this, don't skip this step. It's foundational. Anything you invest in it in this time in camp will pay off dividends. It's been skipped too long in their education. So we've talked about why we still need handwriting, but now I'm going to ask you a question that's probably going to surprise you. Manuscript or cursive? Cursive. Some of you are saying cursive. Denelian. Well, I'm going to make an argument today that at summer reading camp, you need to remediate your students with cursive, even if their print is terrible. And here's why. First of all, it's difficult to reverse B and D and P and Q in cursive. Cursive emphasizes the direction of reading and writing. In addition, words are connected in cursive. Many kids who struggle with reading will read by blending the end of one word to the beginning of another. They're struggling with where words begin and end in their reading. They're struggling it in their writing. But in cursive, there is a kinesthetic experience. It's a word, it's connected. Pick up the pencil, it's a new word. You are experiencing that. In addition, in cursive, provided that you choose the right kind, there's several different versions of cursive, but many of them the lowercase letters all begin on the baseline. What do you need to do when you instruct in print? The first thing you need to do is say, where do you place your pencil? And there are 8 different places that lowercase letters begin in print. So in cursive, we eliminate that and we always start at the same spot. In addition, cursive, did you know this was taught in the United States first until the 1940s? What? And Montessori still teaches it first. But we think that everybody is always printed. The idea of beginning with manuscript is new in terms of world history. In fact, most of the world still begins with cursive in their languages. The English-speaking world actually has been following the United States, the lead of the United States. But people I know who are my age from the UK began with cursive. And one of my good friends said, we only learned how to print in drafting classes in high school. So don't think that this is like a new thing to, think about cursive first or to think about bringing cursive back. It's actually new to think about writing in manuscript first. And so what I like to summarize this is that cursive was designed for the human hand and printing was designed for the printing press. So take a moment and write the word teacher in cursive and in print. And before you do that, I want to tell you what you're focusing on as you do. Which one uses less fine motor skill? Print? Think again. Cursive. Why? Because it's flowing. When you write in cursive, you have these motions. When you write in print, you also have these up and down motions. It's very, very fine motor skill intensive. Can you feel that? How you have to lift up, whereas in in cursive it's not. You can just flow from letter to letter. And so what do we ask kids to do first traditionally in school? We ask them to begin what's more fine motor intensive, but what do young kids lack? Fine motor skills. And so we really even should be beginning here. But, okay, another question for you. How many of you in the room write in perfect cursive? 1, 2. How many of you write in print? Just if you're writing something. Couple. How many of you blend cursive and print? Okay, look around. This is true across the country. Why do all Americans blend cursive and print? Because we're confused. That's what someone said. We do it because of muscle memory. What did we learn first? Print. Then we were told cursive is better or easier. It's faster. And in 3rd grade, we're going to teach cursive. But we already have 3 years of muscle memory. And so even if you want to overcome all that muscle memory, it's hard. If any of you are musicians, you know that as you're practicing, if you learn something wrong the first time, lots of you are nodding your heads, hard to undo the muscle memory of learning it wrong. It's almost impossible to overcome 3 years of practice and then switch. So also have compassion on your kids when they're doing this. But it's important to understand with remedial readers, many of them find tremendous relief switching to cursive because it's less fine motor skill. Many dyslexia centers across our country, one of the first things they do to remediate a student is switch them to cursive. And I have tutored kids who when they write in print, it looks like a 5-year-old. And when they learn cursive, they write like an adult a few weeks later. It is dramatic. And do you know what that also does for their self-esteem? It's huge. It's really huge. And it's also huge for all sorts of other reasons within their language learning. All right, one moment. Now, one of the arguments I get, and I just want to address, objections that I hear, is that cursive does not look like book face. I'll take questions right at the end about all of handwriting. And what I'd like to challenge you with is book face doesn't always look like book face. Because when we have the a-a-ah phonogram, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have a tickle. I've been fighting a cold. Let's see. If you don't mind, I left myself a piece of gum. And I don't like to chew gum when I'm speaking because I think it's rude, but I think it's better than coffee. So if you'll excuse me, because it usually takes care of a tickle. Okay, what we have here is book face. When we teach a-a-ah, we already have to teach students that there are 2 forms of it, right? And oftentimes we don't address this straight on with the students. But the cursive version actually looks very similar to the book face version. It just has a connector stroke. I am really sorry. Liz, do you think there's any chance you could teach this session? No. What was that? No, I don't know what it is. All right, I'm going to take a long drink and a short break. That'd be better, yeah. No, I'll try. I am very sorry. The same thing with g, j. There are 2 forms of it. Very astute. Oh, man. Visual students will notice this. All right, cough drop. Do you think it'll work? Good long. I'm so embarrassed. What was that? Maybe. I hope it's so. All right. I was doing so well till just that moment. All right. So gutja is the same thing. But what do you notice is different between the book face and the manuscript and cursive? It's just connector strokes again. And there are occasionally phonograms where there's a big difference. But it's no different for students to learn z as having a difference than it is for them to learn the 2 book face versions of g, j. And so these minor differences are much better than trying to deal with all of the extra fine motor skill, where do letters begin and end for students. Now, it's also important that we teach students how to tilt their paper. This is something that I get a lot of confusion about, and people often look at our handwriting programs and they say, why don't you teach block face letters, the ones that are upright? And it's not that slanted is harder. I don't know why we think that. Because block face letters come from writing with your hand straight parallel to the board. So if we're going to write in block or straight up and down, we have to put it perpendicular to the board. But if we're going to write slanted, we put the board tilted. And then when we untilt the board or the paper, it looks slanted. Why do we do this? So if you want to take out a piece of paper and do a little experiment with me, I'll show you the ergonomics of handwriting. And what you're going to do is place the paper straight on and then open and close your elbow and draw a line on that paper. And what you're going to notice is when your elbow opens and closes straight on, that line is slanted. Do you see that? To the lines. And so if you're wanting to write on the lines and your paper is oriented like this, your elbow is going to be crowded because you have to go straight across. If you simply slant the page like this and then open and close your elbow, you'll notice that arc follows the lines more naturally if you find the right tilt to the page. Do you see that? And then as you're writing, your elbow just opens. Many kids don't discover this, and it's really simple, and it really helps because this is now fixing some of the ergonomics of writing. Another thing that many kids do not discover naturally is to move the page up with this hand as they're going. And so as they're writing, right, they're like this, the farther down the page they get. And it might seem obvious to you, but most kids are really relieved when you explain to them, oh, is that getting a little uncomfortable? Just move the page up with your hand. And that explicit instruction is really helpful to helping them with some of their common issues with handwriting. Now, the goal of teaching handwriting is to develop rhythmic and automatic muscle memory. When you are writing, do you want to be thinking anything about how to form letters? No. Many kids, if you notice this, who struggle with writing are actually forming letters differently in different words or different parts of the page. They are thinking a great deal about writing. We need this to be automatic. We teach it so it becomes automatic muscle memory so they can focus on what they're actually writing and the higher order skills. But until you have automatic fluency with writing, you're not going to be able to do that. And we're going to teach beginning with large motor movements because fine motor movements are very abstract. It's hard to understand what's happening fine motor-wise. But if you do it large motor movements, you can begin to experience those movements. We're going to experience this in a minute. We also want to teach the single letter lowercase phonograms first. And we want to teach them grouped by initial stroke. So all of the phonograms or the letters start with strokes. And if you start with all the ones that start with the swing stroke or start with the roll stroke first, you're developing the muscle memory for that initial stroke. So don't teach A through Z. And it doesn't matter which stroke you choose first, but teach them group by stroke. In your manual, you have a little sample here of some letters, I thought, grouped by stroke. Oh, maybe not. I'm very sorry. I guess I pulled that out. You can see them on the cards in the back of on our table. If you'll see, there's some handwriting cards, and they have the strokes, and you'll see some samples of how they're grouped. And just being aware that if you teach them by initial stroke, that will help. It's also important to teach the sounds at the same time. So when we're teaching phonograms, I do not teach, this is just a-a-ah. I say this is a-a-ah. We're going to march around to it. We're going to move with it. Then we're going to learn how to write it, because writing it is experiencing the shape kinesthetically. We're going to be saying the sounds as we write it. Same thing with words. This will go on into spelling. This will go on into composition, but we start and we don't skip any steps in their development. We will provide explicit instructions. Oftentimes we just sit kids down and go, this is an a-a-ah, go ahead and write it for me. And that's a visual activity. Some kids will get it. Most of them will write it in all different ways. But when we provide explicit instructions about where to start and how to write it, we ensure success for all students. We're going to compare the book face and the handwritten version, and I'm going to let you experience all this and encourage the students to repeat, because repeating out loud is one of the learning modes. And emphasize the natural rhythm. So the way I like to do this is I like to teach you a new language. Because if you're going to do this in English, you're not going to experience it in the same way as if you were learning a new language. So I'm going to teach you Russian today. Are there any Russian speakers in here? I am so thankful. My Russian pronunciation is terrible. I learned Russian about 20 years ago. I haven't used it much since. But none of you will be critiquing that today. So we are going to learn this Russian phonogram. You need to have paper and a pencil out. And this phonogram says, ch. Go ahead. All right? And that is the book face version. And when you write ch in Russian and you're learning, by the way, Russian students learn cursive first. And so we're going to learn how to write ch in cursive. And don't write it yet. This is what it looks like in cursive. So how is this ch different from the book face one? Connector strokes. That's it. Do you see that? So we're just going to compare. We want kids to have a chance to explicitly look at them. We often skip this step as well, and we don't, even with manuscript, you need to do this because G's look different. Show them all the different forms of G. Acknowledge it. Some kids are noticing this and confused. All right, here's how we're going to learn to write ch. Go ahead and on your piece of paper, draw 3 lines. And draw them kind of big because you're going to use your pointer finger. I sometimes make a chart like this and just hang it in the classroom. Or you can make a chart on the computer and give it to the kids to just have with their fingers. Or you can use a whiteboard like this. But we're going to use our pointer fingers. Because large motor skill starts at the elbow. Fine motor skill is in the fingers. So you're going to start at the midline. Swing up to the top line. Go ahead and do that with me. Start at the midline, swing up to the top line, down to the baseline, swing up to the top line, down to the baseline. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. So it's going to be swing up to the top line, down to the midline, swing up to the top line, down to the baseline. Okay? Once again, let's say it together. Start at the midline, swing up to the top line, down to the midline, swing up to the top line, down to the baseline. All right, now you've got the explicit directions about where it sits on the lines. Now we're going to emphasize the rhythm. Start at the midline, swing down, ch. Let's do it. Swing down, ch. Let's do it with our fingers in the air. Swing down, ch. We could lay on the floor, do it with our feet. We could do it in a sensory box, swing down, ch. Are you guys beginning to feel what ch looks like? Isn't that interesting? All right. In Russian, this says, sorry. So this is and when we write it, it looks like this. Oops, let me write it a little bit neater. Okay, does this look familiar? So we could have a conversation about the book face version of and the different ways that is written. Let's go ahead and learn how to write it. We're going to start at the baseline, curve up to the midline, roll around to the baseline, swing up to the midline, down to the baseline. Let's say it together. And I'm doing this in rapid fire. If I was doing this with the student, I would go curve and have them do curve. Curve, roll, have them do curve and roll. But for time, we're going to condense it. So we're going to curve up to the midline, roll around to the baseline, swing up to the midline, down to the baseline, And it becomes curve, roll, swing, down, Okay? The last phonogram in Russian is this. Now, I need to apologize. This is very, very difficult to say. So just listen closely, okay? It's E. Now, you're all thinking that wasn't so hard, but I promise you, you're not saying it correctly. You actually have an auditory processing problem in Russian. I'm not joking. I actually can't hear these sounds either. This is why I was asking if there's any Russian speakers in the room. But I can feel them. And here's what I mean. I want you to say the sound I and E. What's the same about I and E? What? Your teeth. But also, do you feel your lips? I, E. So this is a lax 10th vowel pair linguistically. Now, Russian has E, and it has a sound E right in between E and I. So, put your fingers on your lips, say I, say E, and then find E. And then even compare E and E. Can you hear the difference, E and E? I can't either. Do you know why we can't often as English speakers hear the difference? Because they don't matter. Those two sounds don't differentiate in our language. But they do in Russian. They will change the word. So Russians hear these as very different, but can you feel the difference? Absolutely. So now this is actually becoming for you not so much a phonogram at first, but as a kinesthetic cue of where to place your mouth and how to say the sound. And if you were to do this over time, and you would begin to hear the difference. If you took that little curve off the top, that's E, hard E. This is E, soft E. And you would begin to hear the difference, not just feel the difference. Isn't that interesting? And so let's learn how to write E. Go ahead, practice saying it. E. And it looks like this. I'm going to write it so you can see it. Now, does the cursive version look a little bit different? Can you see a relationship between them? Yeah, rather than drawing that straight line, we're going to come back down because it's easier to write. Oftentimes in cursive, there's some slight differences that make writing it simpler for the hand. They simplify the muscle movements. So here's how we're going to learn to write E. You're going to put your finger on the baseline, swing up to the midline, down to the baseline, swing up to the midline, down to the baseline, E. Oh, and then curve. All right, let's do it together. Swing, down, curve, E. All right, let's do ch very large in the air. Swing, down, ch. Let's do ah. Curve, roll, swing, down, ah. Let's do E. Swing, down, curve, E. You've actually just written your first Russian word. Who can read it? I'm hearing some of it. Call it out louder. Chai. You've now taken your phonograms and you've blended them into your first word. What is chai? Tea. And just so you know, in Russian, chai is black tea. There's no spices in it, unlike Indian chai. And you are now taking phonemic awareness skills, combining them with the phonograms that you're learning, beginning to read your first word. We are on our way to reading in Russian. Okay. When you practice handwriting, do plenty of practice, especially the first week or two, large motor skill. I believe that there are some examples on page 35 for you of this. There are phonogram games. You can practice matching games. You can also practice with the cursive and book face. You can begin to play games. I often put stations up of whiteboards around the room, and we'll have relay races, and I'll call out a phonogram, and they have to run to each of the stations and write it, and then come back and tag their next partner. You can see there's lots of ideas about how to get those kids kinesthetically engaged. Writing also does not need to be sitting at a desk at summer reading camp all summer, okay? You can go out to the playground, practice writing it if you have sand, any place. Why not? I mean, get up, move, switch places. Bring in shaving cream, put it on the tables. It'll clean them up really nice and they can practice their writing. Last couple tips. If you are teaching cursive, you need to teach kids how to connect the letters, teach it explicitly. All of the phonograms that end on the baseline are going to connect from the baseline. Super easy since they also begin on the baseline. There are a few that end on the midline, and I usually use a little analogy and say it is like one phonogram is holding up its foot and the other phonogram is holding it by its hand. I'll even have the kids stand there, and we'll just talk about how you just lift up. Instead of going all the way down to the baseline, you just start right at the midline. So, and kids love to kind of stand in this funny position and model this, and they experience, oh, yeah, it's not a big deal. Now, just if you are teaching manuscript, I need to warn you, you have to teach spacing explicitly, and many of us are aware of this, and we're aware, put 2 fingers between the word, or between the words, but it's actually very, very hard. And you need to have empathy with students. And this is why spacing in manuscript is so hard, because those letters start in many different places. You can't just start on the baseline and know where you're going to go. You have to plan, oh, I'm starting halfway between the midline and the baseline, and I am now rolling backwards. And now I have to allow for all that space. If you're teaching manuscript, you must allow lots of time for practice of that. And if you're teaching manuscript, it's all the same things we were just doing. Explicit, emphasize the rhythm. It's not impossible to use manuscript if your districts insist on it, but be explicit in that instruction, emphasizing the rhythm as well. Teachers always in this session ask me about pencil grip, so I'll tell you my answer right now. I am not a stickler about exactly how a student holds a pencil, because I think there's some personal preference, and I think whenever we can give personal preference, we should, because we're all different. So one thing I would suggest for summer reading camps, go out and buy a whole bunch of different types of pencil grips, because different grips encourage different types of holding. And so some people suggest holding it with 2 fingers and writing like this. I can't write like that, and they insist on it, but I can't. Others suggest like this. There's a few variations. As long as they can move their fingers for fine motor, it's fine. If the student's holding it like this, I would suggest saying, here's a group of pencil grips. Why don't you try them out? Which one do you like the best? Give them choice. And those pencil grips will guide them in some of the variations, and then let them select what's the most comfortable for them. But show them, when they're doing this, explain, good writing, which is going to be easiest for you, is from your fingers. That's fine motor. This, can you move your fingers? No, it's going to be wrist or elbow. So large motor writings from here, do lots of practice with that, but fine motor writings from here. And what's also fascinating is the brain does not distinguish when you learn those motions between large and fine motor skill. So if you've learned them large motor skill, you can do them fine. If you've learned them with your arm, you can do them with your foot. So if your students have fine motor development, they'll be able to translate what they learned large motor to fine motor. If they don't have fine motor skills, which is also possible, then also incorporate, stringing beads to make necklaces and building things with screws and nuts at the camp as well. Because helping them develop fine motor outside the context of writing will also help them prevent having an aversion to writing, which we don't want. And if that's the case, if you have a student struggling at camp with fine motor skill, get them a whiteboard of this size. Let them write everything to you large motor. Is there a problem, do you think, if they can spell their words and write some of the things large motor? No, they're still communicating through sprint. They're still expressing themselves through writing. That's what we need. Let them write on the board using their elbow until they've developed that, and then help them with that. Also, don't trace. I know it's really tempting when we're handwriting to say, here's the letters for you to trace, but when you teach tracing, this is what happens. You have these dots, and the child's supposed to connect them. The goal of writing is automatic, rhythmic, what? Muscle memory. And when they're doing this, they're doing this. Is that automatic, rhythmic muscle memory? No, we want them to do this. So the dots actually do not reinforce the goal of handwriting. Also, don't let them practice until you're seeing they're confident. Really important the first week of camp, because you will be fighting reversals. You'll be fighting the problems that do not get taught correctly the whole time. You've already been struggling with this for years as these children are coming up. So don't assign handwriting copy work until you see that they've got that muscle memory down. Sit with them. Be explicit. This is a great place for your volunteers. So-and-so needs practice writing all the curved stroke letters. Let the volunteer go and work with those. So just a few ideas for you. And then there's a ton of games in our game book that you can look at. And we have a lot of handwriting products that you can look at out there if these are not enough ideas for you to implement on your own. So I can take questions about handwriting.
I have students that hold their pencils between their bottom fingers like this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you try to break them with that? Okay.
I do. And that's where I would buy fun, colorful pencil grips and try to encourage them to move towards using their fingers. And when I'm working with students, I always try to show them why it's important for them. So I talk to them about how it's really hard to write with your wrist. These lines are really tiny. The lines are really sized for finger writing, not for wrist writing. And so just try to explain to them some of that and then say, here's these colorful, pretty, various shapes and sizes. You choose which one makes the most sense to you. Yes?
One of the things with handwriting instruction, I know teachers are so pushed to have time to put that into their day, and so that ends up going by the wayside. What is a realistic amount of time? How should we encourage teachers to spend the time? I mean, is it 5 minutes, 10 minutes? How do they carve out the time?
So if we teach handwriting right from the beginning, you might invest a couple of weeks at the beginning of the school year. Like I'm talking now kindergarten and first grade. So in kindergarten, you might spend the first 2 weeks with 15, 20 minutes a day, and then you won't have any issues.
All of it up front.
All of it up front. You won't need to keep spending, like if you start adding up how much we spend in little time in trying to fix everything, if you just taught it right from the beginning, got all those kids with good skills, you wouldn't be wasting so much time throughout the rest of the year. And that is a really strong point that I have for you with summer reading camps. These kids are probably struggling with handwriting. Invest the first week in lowercase letters. Even if you spend 45 minutes a day teaching them those, because the dividends will pay off for the rest of their life. Invest the second week in the uppercase letters. But get them down, get them solid. And those kids also will boost in confidence as they remediate this. They feel terrible when their handwriting looks like they're 5. They feel ashamed. If you send them home from camp writing better than their peers who didn't go to camp, writing in cursive that looks like their parents, do you know what that will do for them? It's huge. So please invest. And it's really, really tempting at the beginning of camp to not invest in the foundational skills and be in a hurry, right? Super tempting. Challenge each other to break that temptation. Yes?
How do you suggest translating those skills like cursive writing to students like in high school? In 9th grade, if they haven't been taught how, if back in elementary middle school, how to write in cursive. And that does help build their understanding and retention when they do write in cursive and take notes and they're doing essays and stuff. How would you recommend incorporating that into a college prep curriculum, teaching that foundational skill?
You know, I would say it really, she's asking how do we incorporate this in high school education and kids who haven't had these skills. I'll need to think a little bit about it, but my brief, quick answer, and then you could come to me afterwards, would be that if the students are in those 25% that are reading really well, they're college bound, they're writing in print, I wouldn't worry about it. If they're in this group of kids who are struggling, I would try to, I don't know, offer a session on teaching cursive. I'm not quite sure. Because at that stage, you have to sell it to the kids. But a lot of adults actually approach us privately and want to buy handwriting curriculum because they're so embarrassed by their handwriting. So there might be something there to engage kids with that as well. And I don't know how to also sell it into your curriculum. Okay, yes.
This is more a personal question.
Yes.
I have a granddaughter who's 4.
Yeah.
And we believe that she is left-handed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hand that she seems to favor. My husband is left-handed, has the world's worst handwriting, probably because he does not have opportunity at some point, I think, to really learn the skills of handwriting. But my concern is, how is it different? Because the schools, as I understand it now, as a high school teacher, my students would tell me that not to write in cursive because they couldn't read it. You know, I can't read that. Now, I think about her, and she's in a pre-K program, and everything is manuscript, you know. So, and as a left-hander, and with the manuscript, are there differences?
Yeah, so she has,
Because the hand sometimes is differently
Yeah.
placed, the paper is different.
so she has two questions that I heard. One, kids not being able to read cursive, and we're using it. I've done a lot of volunteering in the schools, and kids always complain when I write in cursive, even in middle school. And I tend to respect them because I'm not their classroom teachers, and I don't have the ability to push on the issue. But I would say in summer reading camp in specific, I would write exclusively in cursive on the board. I would require cursive. I would teach cursive, and they will get over it very, very quickly. They will. I mean, they might whine and complain a little bit, but they will be fine with it in 2 or 3 weeks. Because it takes a little bit of effort when they've been only exposed to print. But a lot of these kids will gravitate towards cursive for their own writing. And as soon as they do that, then you're going to have all the battle won for your reading, your writing, because they're going to find it so much easier than what they were doing. Now, they do have the muscle memory issue, so you'll have to remind them, nope, I would like that in cursive, thank you. And that's just because that's what they've been doing for years. They're not trying to be, defiant or something. And then the other question is lefties. Just a couple tips for left-handed students. Right-handed students tilt their board this way. Left-handed students tilt it the opposite way. I've had a lot of left-handed people tell me there's no problem learning cursive or, manuscript versus cursive. There's issues with, you're erasing your writing as your hand goes over it and some things like that. But some of that can also be solved by helping them not even write on the whiteboard, by writing maybe with a marker on paper so that it doesn't erase and they're not stressed by that. And the same issues, a lot of lefties curve because they don't move the paper up. So a lot of the same things apply. It's just slightly different orientation. Yes?
Writing in cursive, are there any issues with children who have BD confusion in print?
No, it resolves it. And it's fascinating because they begin to see the orientation. It emphasizes left and right. Another thing, on our blog posts, we have a blog on the Logic of English website, and there is a really detailed post, which I'm not going to take the time to go into because it's laid out, about what if kids reverse letters like B and D, stepping through how to remediate that in specific. So look, if you have very strong issues with reversals, it's in the last couple months blog posts about reversals at www.logicoфenglish.com blog. Liz could even maybe write the site up here once she finds it, so you can look that up because it steps through exactly how to remediate that if it's persisting. All right, we have 10 minutes to lunch, and I am going to begin to open up the topic of our language again, and by going through A through Z. And as we go through A through Z, what I want you to pay attention to is, are there sounds that you haven't been teaching for A through Z? And if there are, I want you to stop and think, oh my word, I've been saying that's an exception all these years. Or I've been thinking of it as an exception. So this is A, aw. Go ahead. A, aw. Now, something else I want to bring up as we do this is a lot of the kids who feel like this struggled with ma, pa, water as exceptions. But when we teach them all the sounds right from the beginning, or in reading camp, we go back to them, this is a great place to address shame. Because lots of the kids coming to your camp are not going to feel very good about being at summer reading camp, are they? They're going to feel like, I'm the dumb kid who has to go to school in the summer. And this is the perfect time. First day. Hey, you know what? I bet you were taught this as an A. And I bet you really struggled with the fact that sometimes it also says ah. Have you ever noticed that? Most of these kids are going to go, yes, I did. Or S, saying S and Z. You know what? I, as the teacher, didn't even realize it, and you were right. Because these kids are extremely perceptive, aren't they? And all the time, what have we been saying to them? You are wrong. There's something wrong with you. And I'm not trying to say as teachers we should feel ashamed, because we shouldn't. We can't teach what we don't know. So don't take that away from it, but let this child go, wow, I noticed something. And you can then even say to them, I bet this was really confusing to you for years. Guess what? I have all sorts of things we're going to help you with during summer reading camp just like this, where we're going to find things. And if you had noticed that before, why don't you tell us? Because you're giving them then a chance to overcome shame. Because I will tell you, teaching kids to read in 3rd or 4th grade is not hard. Do you know what's hard? Addressing this. Very, very hard. And they are already feeling this. And they're feeling it deeply. And one of the most important things you have to do the first couple of weeks is bring down those walls of shame. Elevate their self-esteem. And not falsely. Like false praise, kids hate it. They can detect it a mile off. So don't falsely praise them. Don't patronize them. Instead, give them real praise about who they are, what they've been noticing. Build them up, truly. Help them to understand their gifts as math and science concrete thinkers, if that's what they are, as creative thinkers, or what you're seeing. All right, what does this say? B, k, s. So 2 sounds. K, s, d. This is e. G, j. All right, listen for this one. I, E, ya. How many sounds? Are any of you surprised? I was shocked. E is in piano. E is in stadium. Ya is in onion. Ya is in stallion. Every time kids have encountered these, we've usually said that's an exception, or we've somehow rotely memorized it, or if you're like me, you've intuited it. And so it says, I, E, ya. J, k, o, n, a, o, u. 3 sounds. So the little word to is not an exception. It's not a sight word. It is a very common sound of this phonogram. P, qu. Oh, by the way, Q always needs a U. U is not a vowel here. This is a multi-letter phonogram that says qu, s, z, t, a, u, u, 4 sounds. Let's say it together. A, u, u, v, w, x, o, x, z. Yep. And 4 sounds here. Ya, I, E. Are you all reading them? I was like, man, this group is so good. And then I figured it out. Usually I say them and people repeat. And I was like, this is amazing. All right. Zzz. Okay. Were there new sounds for you? Because for a while there I was thinking there weren't. Were there new sounds? Yes. So your first day of summer reading camp should be reteaching A through Z, beginning to teach handwriting. It may sound so basic, but if you skip this step, you're going to be struggling the entire rest of the time. And you know what? This is a great place to say to the kids, I'm really sorry that we didn't teach you this from the beginning. And once again, please do not hear anything about guilt towards teachers. I will just emphasize and emphasize, you can't teach what you don't know. If you don't know it, you can't teach it. It's not your fault. Your teacher preparation programs didn't teach you. Your teachers didn't teach you. So let's leave the concept of who's to blame behind. Someone else can argue about that because that takes a lot of energy. And let's just go, wow, we know this now. Let's start in a new direction, okay? And when you do that, you can say to the kids, guess what? There's a bunch of sounds we didn't teach you. you were probably noticing, and we're sorry. And you'll get a fresh start, and you'll begin to fill in gaps. So one of the goals of summer reading camp is to figure out where there's gaps. You guys have been doing a good job. There's a lot of places that they have the right tools, right? But there's also some places where there were leaps made, where there were gaps, and those students couldn't make that leap. So you want to go and make all the steps filled in so they don't have to make any leaps. And if some of those kids in your class are reviewing a little bit, I promise you in 20 minutes they'll be getting something new. And if they're reviewing a little bit, then do you see what I'm saying? As you review this, there's going to be parts that some kids knew and some that you're filling in gaps, and that's a good thing. All right, just a few tools for you. There's a book called Doodling Dragons. It may be too old for summer reading camps. You can decide never ever pull out a resource that makes your third graders feel babyish. So this might be one of them, but I'm telling you about it for your younger classrooms. It goes through the sounds of A through Z in a great story. And really be sensitive. If an activity, another teaching tip for summer reading camps, if you pull out a game and a child goes, that's babyish, don't make them play it. Okay? Promise? Because they're struggling with this already. They feel like they are babies. They're kindergartners. They can't learn how to read. Don't trigger that. Go, oh, okay, well, let's play a different game. And it's just not an issue, right? The content is it. Oh, also want to elevate it? Another idea to elevate their self-esteem? You can announce on the first day, you know what, this is actually linguistics camp. Y'all are going to learn what, oh, I said you all.
Good job.
I've been in the South. Y'all are going to learn what linguists know. You're going to learn what most of your classroom teachers don't know. They'll feel good, and it is linguistics. It really is. Okay? And once again, if you are struggling, how do I pull this together? If you decide as a school to use Logic of English, or if you as a teacher want to have the essentials book there, like which phonograms to teach and what to say are like laid out for you with scripts, practice. There's even practice games from our game book, practice activities. Same thing in our foundation series for K1. And I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I just don't want you to panic, because that's how I feel as a teacher when I get lots of new information. How on earth am I going to implement this? So know there's resources. Also, when you're teaching the phonograms, what I haven't told you, because I've been using slides, is that when I was a teacher beginning to teach this, and even when I began to tutor some, I actually learned them slower than the kids because I was unlearning like 20 years of information, or 30 at the time. And all on the back of the cards are the tips. There's the sounds, there's even sample words if you're struggling with dictionary markings. And here's the ultimate tip about it. You don't have to tell the kids you don't know. Here's how. You put the phonogram that you're about to drill in the back. Then you see it first, you get the sounds, then you show them, and you happily let them read them. And I'm serious, they will probably learn them faster than you because they're younger, and because though they are unlearning some, they actually are unlearning less than you. If you have questions about how to pronounce them, on our website there is a free phonogram list. You click on the phonogram, you hear it. It's great. You don't have to rely on this yourself, and that's all free. There's also videos. If you're thinking, oh, I want to revisit some of these concepts, our website has tons of free videos, and today will be on that website for free as soon as we can edit it. So if you want to share this with colleagues, or if you're like, I really want to remember some of the handwriting section, you'll be able to go back and rewatch it. I feel passionately about changing reading education in the United States. I don't think that we can do this without massively providing free resources and just saying, this is our language. This is how we change reading. Let's work together to do this. A lot of teachers also like the Phonogram app. Is it $2.99? $3.99? I don't know. It's not very expensive. $2.99. You can create users in your classroom. You can set up students, and they can practice it on their own using the app if you have iPads. So these are just a few ideas for you about how to reinforce this. And Do you have any questions? After lunch, we are going to go on to consonants and vowels, and it's one of my favorite topics. I know you can't wait, right? Yes.
Is there rules for teaching what the letter says in different words? So if the letter has multiple.
She asked, is there a rule to teach what the letters or the phonogram says in different words? The answer to that is yes, sometimes, and we're going to learn those. And no, sometimes you're going to have to try the various sounds. And those are skills that we also teach, but they'll have all the sounds there. But for the ones that have rules, we're teaching several of them today in the afternoon.
Any benefit to having the phonogram in cursive on the card?
Phonograms in cursive on the card. We actually have handwriting tactile cards that are in cursive or book face. We have game cards that are in book face and in cursive. So why do we have them just on the phonogram card in book face? Well, they are going to read books. So the goal that you have is to teach the relationship between them and to practice and develop fluency with both. And so we emphasize book face on these cards, and then we emphasize handwriting on some of the other materials, and then we play games using both. All right, I have just an inspiration before lunch to leave you. So with these, I just thought about it and thought, that's what I thought looks boring. How do you make this exciting? When you practice, even on the first day, you can lay these out on the floor. You can tell kids, I'm going to call out a phonogram, want you to run and jump on it, want you to run and snatch it. We're going to play games together. We're going to deal out cards. You're going to play in pairs. I'm going to call out a phonogram. Whoever snatches the first one, snatches it, gets a point. We're going to, do you see what I'm saying? There are so many ways to practice this that are really, really fun. And the kids are going to benefit from that. You can write the phonograms on the board. They're going to throw a ball at them. If you can use Nerf guns in your school, they're super fun. I don't know if that's kosher. In some states it's not. But just a little tip, if that's okay in the South, if you get them, no? Oh, well. Nope. Okay. No Nerf guns. Yes?
What is the correlation of writing in cursive and reading in print?
The correlation? What do you mean?
In learning
There hasn't been shown to be a problem. That's why we switched to print in the 1940s. The theory was kids would learn how to read better because they're reading in the same version that they're writing. But what it's caused and what we've shown is it's caused a lot of issues with handwriting. It's caused a lot of problems with reversals. And if you Google dyslexia and cursive, you'll come up with a bunch of studies and show that there's a strong correlation for if a student has a learning disability, teaching them cursive is a big step in remediating it. It's not an issue for reading.
Are there exercises for reading in cursive that benefits the block manuscript?
Exercises. Well, they're going to be reading their own handwriting in cursive. They'll be reading your handwriting in cursive, but they'll also be reading books, and the workbooks, if you use them, are in book face. The goal is the correlation. It's not like, maybe this helps you, it's not like if we're learning to read in cursive in English, it's like learning to read in Russian. It's not that different. All we're trying to do is say, well, AAA has these connector strokes, and it's the same sounds, same phonograms, same words. You just have to learn to see the slight visual differences between them. And that's not very hard compared to all of the muscle memory issues and all of the fine motor issues and all the reversals that are generated by trying to write in a way that's not respectful of the human hand. Yes?
How do you explain to a parent, not, like, say you were doing this camp at your church, and you've got all these volunteers, you've trained them, they do know what they're doing for this camp. And then these parents come in, well, that's not what they're teaching in the school.
Okay, that's a different situation. If you are teaching a reading camp in the schools and your schools are only teaching manuscript, please teach manuscript. Because I want those kids to go back to school and succeed in the classrooms that they're in and under the expectations they're in. And sadly, I know a lot of schools where if a child writes in manuscript or in cursive and it's expected they write in manuscript, the teacher tells them not to. and I don't know that that happens in your schools, but it does happen. Or if the kid goes back writing in cursive and nobody else does, they don't want to. Instead, remediate then in manuscript. And all the same sorts of things, emphasizing the formation, emphasizing the rhythm, but prepare them to go into what they're going into. And the same thing with your schools. If your school's not for this, do the same thing in manuscript. Okay? Any other questions? Yes?
As far as levels, like in a camp situation, like, of course, I know my own classroom, but with students in a camp, like, I don't really know what levels they are. Like, how are we supposed to know where to start them in this situation?
Yeah, so she's asking with levels in camp. This is a big question, and I think that I'm getting the signal that there's lunch. So I'm not trying to put you off. Can you hold that question? Can we get a little bit farther in the content? And then will you promise to ask the same question? Because I think if we have more context, that will actually be helpful. All right, well, thank you so much. We will start again right about 12:30. So.
Derek's getting ready to pray for the food. We got
Yeah,
two
thanks.
different stations with